Right, everyone. Welcome to this week's podcast. Oof, wow. I think we owe viewers an apology, Al.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we may have overstepped on that last podcast when we said what could possibly go wrong, and
Maybe we live in interesting times.
yeah, because our last podcast was roughly 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, and I think right after we recorded, um, Israel bombed uh, Iran. A day later, the USA retaliated, or not retaliated. The USA bombed Iran, and this was after Iran retaliated with rockets to Israel. Somehow we survived World War III, nuclear holocaust, and that didn't.
Oops, Al, did we lose you? Oh, looks like Al just froze right there. So there must be some sort of
So we are here today now, and
yeah,
unfortunately, over the
yeah,
holiday.
yeah. When we just said what could possibly go wrong, literally for the last 30 seconds, you were like this.
Oh, great, great, awesome. So I don't know if you guys got that, but basically we had a almost nuclear war with Iran. That 12 days later, that has sorted itself out. Um, and that was literally happened the day after we closed out our last podcast almost 2 weeks ago. So maybe we won't say that anymore. I don't know. Maybe we won't tempt
Come
fate.
on. What could
Uh,
possibly go wrong?
Yeah. So, but unfortunately, and we hope everyone had a good Fourth of July holiday weekend. I was in Maui, recentering my chi, getting my mojo back. I hope all of you guys got to do the same. Unfortunately, big tragedy in Texas, my home state, actually in very close to the area that I grew up, Central Texas, with the flash flooding that happened over the Fourth of July weekend. So we're definitely heartbroken for all the victims, and obviously with my ties to the community, I'm extremely upset and sad for the people of Central Texas. Um, but I think it's a good opportunity for Josh and I to kind of go over some of the flood safety stuff. We've talked about earthquakes, we've talked about fires, I think we talked about hurricanes at one point, plane crashes. Um, we haven't talked about floods much. And I think, it seems appropriate now to kind of talk about flooding and floods and flood safety. In addition, we had a few cyber events as well, which we'll get into, because, cyber never sleeps. So, you know, while the rest of us are trying to mop up from, the last physical natural disaster, cyber's going strong. But we'll get into some of that stuff as well. But why don't we start off with the flood, man? So you and I were kind of going over the timeline and some of the factors leading up to this. You want to give a quick snapshot synopsis or?
Well, yeah, sure. But I also want to snapshot the fact what you are listening to, if anyone who's listening to this podcast for the first time. So, welcome to our podcast. Each week, Al and I talk about a different matter in public safety, cybersecurity, physical security, operational security, or something matter, all along the lines of risk management. And so, this week, we are talking about what the flood,
What the
as well
flood?
as well
And
as
clearly my mind is still in Maui because I totally forgot about the intro part.
hey, you rode the waves back here. That's what matters.
That's right. That's right.
Let's start off this week in Al's home state about the podcast. So, opening statement on this is essentially, well, let's take a look at the fact that, well, so I'm not trying to politicize this by any means. I'm just stating facts, and some of the facts are, in this case, is we know that the Department of Government Efficiency did do government buyouts across the board, and that government buyout includes the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, which also oversees the National Weather Service. And so there was definitely positions that were vacant that was directly or somewhat directly related to Doge's cuts throughout the federal government. We don't know for a fact if they were the root cause, but I would venture and I would say, Al, I think it's reasonable to say there is an impact. There is some sort of effect for having these vacancies or these unplanned retirements. So there's an effect. To what extent, we don't know, but
Well,
we could say
I
it's
mean,
something.
so I mean, we did see KXAN, which is the local NBC station out in Central Texas, primarily based in Austin. They did report that I believe the previous meteorologist who'd been there, it's been like 26 years, and her role, I believe, had been to really do a lot of this local coordination um, with the communities on flood safety and flood mitigation and flood warning. The Doge cuts did impact her position, and I can't remember if she either resigned or retired. I think it was a retirement. But she retired shortly before this event. And and she directly cited that they were going to fund her position, but the funding never came through. And so she essentially just said, "Hey, I'm going to leave." Now, we can say, yeah, it's directly because of Doge, or we can say that, maybe she was just done and move on. But I think the bigger issue here is when you lose somebody with that much experience, with that much relationships, and they walk out the door, whether it's from a government program being cut, or if it's from voluntary retirement or just moving on, career change, if you haven't been grooming the successor, you have a problem, because when they leave, all those relationships leave, and that whole process chain leaves with them, right? And so, I think that, as we kind of go through this, that is a big contributing factor here, to a lot of these communities not being alerted in a timely manner, right?
Right.
And so I think we have to account for that is in these public safety roles, and I definitely agree. Whether you disagree with me or not, it's fine. But I think meteorologists do play a big component in the public safety aspect. They're not often viewed that way, but I 100% believe that meteorologists, are kind of like that intelligence function for first responders. So I think they're definitely fall in that realm as far as I'm concerned. You can disagree with me if you want, that's fine. But the point is those critical public safety, life safety type functions, we have to be very conscious of what happens when we unplug somebody, whether it's forcefully or unforcefully they voluntarily leave, right? There is an impact across the board, up and down. And some of the other information we found as we were kind of digging into this, right? The county, Kerr County, where this occurred, did apply for a grant for an updated flood warning system, right? And they were not approved for the grant. And this is back in 2020. So let's just kind of do some analysis here. They wanted an updated flood safety system. They didn't get it. So this chief meteorologist was likely the connect point for a lot of different people in lieu of that flood safety warning system, right? So that person now leaves. There's a huge gap. There's a huge hole in this public safety apparatus of how do we communicate this out? Who do we communicate it out to, right?
It's it becomes a broken process, especially and by I think it's not 2020. I think we found something that says as early as 2018. So it would be
yeah
administration who would have been authorizing grants of this nature. But there's something to say that a retirement, taking all the institutional knowledge is one thing, but also the institutional relationships that also matter too as well.
And I think that's the institutional knowledge is obviously very important, but the relationships, that is, that's hard to replace. That's a fostered, it's almost like a child. You've grown that relationship over several decades in the case of this person. It's very difficult to replicate that or replace that. Um, and so unfortunately, those are two big glaring factors here, right? I think in this situation, we don't have an updated flood warning system, mass notification system. The person who primarily was responsible for this, probably for the last decade or so, is now gone. They're not in their role. So I think, further investigation will figure out specifically where the ball was dropped. But those look like two really big contributing factors. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar with Central Texas, I'll give you a quick lesson here. Central Texas has a ton of lake streams, and the Colorado River and the Guadalupe River run right through Central Texas. It's kind of the main water artery which feeds that part of Texas. And so flash floods are something we deal with in Central Texas quite a bit. It's not an uncommon occurrence during the rainy season from late February to May. And then occasionally you'll have storms come in the summertime, and the flash flooding occurs. And then hurricane season starts, mid-August, ends into December, and you'll randomly get flash floods. So flash floods are not necessarily something unique to this area. However, in the name flash flood, the flash floods come quickly and they come violently. And so the speed of notification is essential in life safety in these matters, because the sooner you can notify people along that main waterway, save a ton of lives. Because once that swift water comes in, I mean, it's moving 20, 30, sometimes 40 miles an hour. All the debris from upstream is coming with it. So you can imagine, wood, rocks, debris moving at 40, 50 miles an hour and impacting you. It's going to take you out, and you're going to get swept up in the flood, and it's very difficult to fight that current. The chances of survival in the water at that point, either from debris hits or just being overwhelmed from the water rushing over, or if you get caught on something and the water overtakes you, very unlikely. And it's very difficult to do swiftwater rescues. One of the hardest rescues to do is a swiftwater rescue. And so, it's once the flood is set in, once the flash warning has been alerted, it's not uncommon for people to just pack up and leave and go somewhere else. And it's understood. That's what we did. I went camping quite a bit as a kid throughout these areas. And at the flash, we would have the radio going 24/7. And if a flash flood warning came in, we would wake up. We'd always have somebody on radio watch, and we'd wake up and we would leave, because we did not want to play with that. The other thing is too, if you have a vehicle and you don't get out of the area quickly with your vehicle, you're likely going to get stuck in the floodwaters, and your vehicle's going to get stuck. Now you have a bigger situation where you got nowhere to go but on the roof of your car, and you hope to God that the water doesn't rise over you. Which in this case, several trees were covered from the video that we saw, that I posted, and we'll post a link in there too. So so this is a tough one, because this area is known for flash flooding, and there should have been a better communication method.
So one thing I read, for as part of the emergency response, and some people, by no means I'm saying this happened, okay, because I don't have any proof that this happened. But one comment that I read was that there may, not from a first responder, but from the people who were on the campsite and on the ground, there was a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding that potentially the gravity of a flash flood. There was not a true understanding that, hey, when a flash flood happens, it happens. It comes really, really quickly. So one theory, and I'm going to put this out there, clear to say theory, was that some people may have saw the flash flood warning, and rather than, get out there ASAP, they may have actually taken time to break down camp. And, I'm kind of curious, do you think people were wise enough to be breaking down their camp, or do you think people would have, at least in that area, would have had at least the common understanding and knowledge that, hey, when this happens, we got to go and go now?
So, couple of factors, and I think it's a great point, but I think there's a couple factors at play here. One, I think the flash flood warning went out around 11 p.m. Now, keep in mind, this is July 3rd, I believe, when the flash flood warning went out. This is the Thursday before the 4th of July. I I have a feeling most people who were at the campsite, who were at camping, probably had the day off. There's likely some day drinking involved, a lot of sunlight. People were probably tired. Um, so that's factor one. Factor two, the warning did go out very late, and I don't know what Camp Mystic, which is the name of the camp where a lot of these young girls were, unfortunately are missing and killed due to the flash flooding. I don't know what their policies and procedures were. I don't know if they had an emergency um, action plan in place, or if they, even there's a couple factors like even just traffic management, lighting the escape route, right? Having, a well lit escape route from the campsite, that could be a factor, right? People may have been trying to leave but didn't know where to go because it was dark. I mean, some of these campsites along the river, there's not a lot of external lighting, right? There's just not there because it's campsites. The other thing is too, um, like I grew up in Texas, right? So since I was probably three, I knew about flash flooding and what was going on. There's been a lot of people who've moved into Central Texas that didn't grow up in Central Texas. They moved from other parts of the country. So there's a lot of people who may not have been familiar with flash flooding procedures, where leave everything there and get out of there quickly, right? Like you can replace your tent. Don't worry about it. Just go. Uh, I think that may have also played a big factor here. Is some people may just not have heeded the warning. Um, you know, this is kind of what happened in Hurricane Harvey, back in 2017. It's almost like the boy who cried wolf, where every year from August to December, hurricane season in the South, along the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast, and we get the hurricane warnings. A lot of us, it's just kind of noise at this point. Unless it's a Cat 5, I don't, like I don't care, whatever, right? Which is a bad attitude to have. I'm not condoning that. And that's kind of what happened during Harvey in 2017. People were like, whatever, it's just another hurricane. I'm not going to worry about it. Well, unfortunately, it hit, and it hit hard. And 20 years ago during Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, I was down there for the rescues and the relief work. Kind of the same thing happened, where people just were like, whatever, it's a hurricane. We have levees. It's not going to be an issue. So I think all these factors contribute to what happened, right? We don't have proper mass notification. The person who owns the relationships to coordinate the stuff is gone. We got a lot of people coming in from out of town who have moved to the area, who may not be necessarily familiar with what happens when flash flooding occurs in Central Texas. And then on top of that, we've got people who are local to the area who maybe just like didn't care. Like, I've heard this before. I'm not worried about it. I want to enjoy my 4th of July weekend, right? I'm not going to let the weather ruin my day. And then you also had, it was late at night and it's a holiday weekend. People may not have been capable of really understanding what was going on. So I think there's a lot of factors at play here.
Or in fact, it is July 4th. So maybe the most senior people weren't on duty. So it may be
That's also a factor. It's also a factor.
People, not to say they're incompetent or anything like that, but maybe they are still people who are still learning some of the more finer and finer details of things, just so that they have a good understanding of the nuances that you only gain not from being taught, but from experience. And I think anyone here who is listening to the podcast would understand, there are some things you just can't learn in the classroom. You only learn in the field. And I think this is maybe, one of those items you only can learn in the field. And, some of these people also potentially could be learning to build those relationships. It's like their first or second or third time, learning those relationships. So
Yeah.
there's so small little incremental factors is just starting to,
When you think about the
that's for
response,
me. It's starting to.
go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking just like all these little small little factors are just, adding up. I think, when we first started this podcast, we made this point. When you have a failure of any magnitude, like of this magnitude, it is not one single thing. It is a series of small little things adding up together, lining up, and when they line up perfectly, a disaster happens
Yeah.
at that point. And I think as we're looking at this and breaking it subsequently down, you have all these small little, thing items. Some do play a more bigger contributing role than other, but all these small little independent things individually doesn't cause, this disaster, but when combined together does cause this disaster. And sometimes, removing a element or two out of that equation may actually help prevent the disaster.
Right. I'm gonna share my screen real quick just to kind of give everyone an idea of how fast this flood water rises, and then I think people who haven't really experienced a flash flood may not appreciate just how fast this thing overtakes the area. And that's okay. I mean, this is part of what this thing's about is educating people. But when you, I'll put it up here. Let's see here. I should hopefully my screen is sharing. I'll play it here, but you can see how quickly these floodwaters just rise up and how, unfortunately, rain in another part of the state, the drainage is off. It just starts coming in, and before you know it, you are rapidly overtaken. So when we talk about like, you know, you get
That,
the warning you need to leave immediately, literally mean immediately because you can
river
see
went
how
up.
quickly this thing.
That river went up at least 5 to 10 feet instantly, and
Yeah.
speed. It from
And
it went from dry to a raging torrent in a matter of minutes. It looks like.
yeah, and you can see all the debris. So this is what people don't realize is that the debris here is moving at a very rapid rate, very fast. You get hit with that, I mean, it's gonna impale you. It's gonna take you out. So you can see the tree just got taken out by the
Oh wow!
debris.
Look at that. It's already starting to hit the level of that bridge. That bridge at least is what 25 feet above.
Yeah, easily. So I mean, these things are extremely dangerous, and I mean, this is I think this kind of footage highlights that you really have to have that mass notification system in place. And you can see the forest. That's a looks like an oak tree. That is just an oak tree getting taken out.
That tree just got swallowed right there,
You
and
know,
it's right almost at the right underneath the height of the bridge.
And if you notice how that debris got caught in the bridge, right? If you got caught in this floodwater, right, and you got pinned against that bridge, you're done. There's
Oh,
nothing
looks
like
like
there's
there's
nothing you're gonna be able to do.
right there, right there. It looks like there's some spillage right there.
Yep, it's flown over the bridge at this point, and so this is where this gets really dangerous because these low water crossings, they quickly get washed out, right? And so people are now trapped between the banks of the river and the rising floodwaters, right? And they have no way to get out because the low water crossings are gone. So, and the thing to understand about Central Texas is, there's not a lot of high ground. Yeah, it's called the hill country, but if you can't access the high ground, you are stuck literally in the low lying areas, and you're basically watching the floodwaters creep up to you. And there's not much you can do. It's not like California or the Appalachians where you can just you know head to the mountains and get to the higher ground. As you can see from this white shot, there's not a lot of high ground to go to. there's there's nowhere to go. You have to get to those low water crossings quickly and get onto the bridge and get out of there as soon as possible, or it's over for you, right?
Yeah, and this
And
it doesn't
you
even look
saw, I mean,
because
this is a high water crossing, 25 feet, and it's still spilling over, right?
yeah,
So if you delay, that's it for you. You're done.
that looks like that water, and I'm making a rough guess. That looks like at least 25 to 30 miles per hour. Water.
Yeah.
Water does not look like 25. That looks like more like 35, 45 miles per hour.
Well, and as it flows under the bridge, it starts compressing and it actually accelerates.
Yeah.
So when it comes out the other side, it's almost like a jet. So it actually picks up speed. So it's intense.
Yeah. And look at the amount of debris just from like sticks and stuff like that, let alone anything else there.
Yeah. So this is why these things are extremely dangerous. And I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. But these are why these things are extremely dangerous.
Can you read the caption for us? I know it says 20 feet in as little as 37, but 37 what though? 37 minutes. Okay. That's kind of scary if you think about it. 20 feet and then it's going from like, from a little lake of this and then hitting that high and that wide.
Yep.
That 20 feet, that's almost like the width of the entire bridge. So that is what, a couple million gallons of water at least, I
Yeah.
think.
Easily. So I mean, as hopefully everyone was able to see, I mean, these things are no joke. I mean, when the mass notification system goes out and says flash flood warning in your area, you've got to get out of where you're at, and you've got to get out of there. Especially if you're even remotely close to the river banks or low water crossings, you've got to get out of there quickly.
So let's speculate here for a second, from a risk management perspective. Okay. What is the root cause in this case? Like what, not the fact you can't stop water. I mean, we can go down the mother nature route and global warming route and climate change route. I don't feel like going that way because that's a bigger can of worms that we need to go to. But let's like look at this. Let's look at the elements of what man can actually control. What do you think that root cause was? What was the failures that led to people losing their lives?
I mean, from what I can tell, I mean, the speculation that I see here, I will speculate for a minute. I think the word just didn't get out fast enough. Um, the data's there, the technology is there to let us know. I mean, the dams. So, and just so everyone kind of understands how this works. So, rain will occur somewhere, right? And the dams have to open up to allow that water to flow out. Unfortunately, when there's heavy rain, um, where a dam would normally close, right, and contain the water, it's got to let the flow go, or else you're going to flood other parts. So you open up the dams to allow that water to kind of rush out and stabilize the entire river system. When it's really heavy rains, like a hurricane is blown in, or you have just a big rainstorm coming in, the you're gonna have flooding. There's nothing you can do about that. But the word's got to get out to all those communities along the river to evacuate. The sad thing here is during hurricanes, we usually have about 4 to 5 days warning because we can actually track it coming off the Atlantic. We can kind of see where it's going to go. And you can kind of localize what communities need to be evacuated. With flash floods, it's hard because we can't really, we can predict the rainfall, but until it actually starts hitting, we don't really know what's going to happen. And then the dam operators have to, they've got to open those floodgates up, as the situation is developing. So even if I open up the floodgates and a minute later I tell you, hey, I had to send out another 100,000 gallons of water, that water is moving at 20, 30 miles an hour, right? So everything downstream is going to be impacted. Even a minute later, that water has already moved, right? So it's a moving target. It's really tough. And I think the only way really is an effective mass communication system across any riverway. And keeping people informed. Like, hey, the other thing is, I mean, the other thing here too is I don't know. I'd speculate that the camp and some of these other places didn't probably have in place a very robust emergency evacuation system. Um, and clearly in a situation like this, you want the routes clearly marked. You want people to know where to go. You want to be able to route traffic to the nearest um, line of travel that gets them out of them as soon as possible, right? Um, and look, we have to consider some other factors. It was at night. It was 11 o'clock at night when the flash flood warning went out, and then it was 4 in the morning when I think the flash emergency went out, right? So a lot of this was happening, in the dead of night we don't know how effective um, any of this would have been, even if we did have these factors in place, because a lot of people were probably deep in sleep, right? So, and we got to consider you're in a rural area, you're at a campground, you hear the sirens. There were sirens. I mean, we got to give them some credit. They did have some sirens some mobile sirens that they put out there, but um, as everyone saw from the video, even if you have the sirens out there at night, sirens are going off. You're not coherent. You're trying to figure out what's going on. Every minute you wait, 1 or 2 feet of water is rising in that river, right? So, we just, I think for anyone, not just the camp or the communities, but anyone who's going to be coming into these areas, potential flood prone in the floodplain areas, right? Do you know what your route is to get out? Do you know what your emergency action plan is going to be when you hear the siren? Do you have accountability of everybody? What's the essential gear that you need? Is it in your car, right? Or did you take it out? Because you're not going to have time to pack it up. The water's going to move too fast. So, individual steps. I think individual actions, individual accountability when it comes to these type of things is always huge. It always reduces risk in life. It's also very hard to enforce. You can't make people do things even if it makes sense, right? I mean, people are going to do what they're going to do. I think the goals of the communities are to help close that gap, right?
Um, so I was giving this a lot of thought, and I was thinking, the root cause of in this entire situation is hubris. I think in this case, there was a lot of assumptions that things just work. Maybe it's a overconfidence and reliance in technology. Maybe it's an over reliance on um, maybe certain individuals. I mean, your some of your processes and everything don't get exercised until really gets exercised. So I keep thinking about like business continuity, disaster recovery plans is a great example. You
Right.
look at the various call trees that you may have in your BCDR plan. If you don't update your BCDR and so leaves, you have and they're a core chain in that BCDR plan, but they're gone. Like who kicks off the call tree notification process? Who starts the alerts and saying, hey, such and such and this is it's their responsibility, but they're no longer there. It's not until that plan, quote unquote, gets exercised, you realize you actually have certain gaps, which is why continuity is such a challenging thing. And there's a part of me that just wonders, like a series of small little things here. For example, just the hubris, like, oh, we don't need to worry about this. Worry about winning this grant money. Why? Because we have the emergency alert system that everyone has a cell phone, so they're going to get all the alerts to the cell phone. Okay, great. Oh, hey, we don't need to fund this in this program. We don't have to fund this role because why? We have cell phones, and the cell phones and those apps will let people know. Not realizing that there might be a human being in the back that is actually filling out the form and data to get pushed out through the emergency alert system or to those various apps so that people can get notified. And so, maybe these small little things, people don't realize there is a human being in that process. It's not just some, mystical artificial intelligence in the back that is making all the decisions. There's maybe a human being that is, looking and analyzing into data and filtering it before it actually hits you, or even translating it to you, so you have something consumable and addressable. Otherwise, you have to be a PhD in meteorology or something like that so you want to understand what's going on. So I think a lot of it is just a lot of assumptions that were made, and they assumed another set of controls would compensate for it. But at the end of the day, I think there has been such an erosion of those controls that those controls essentially just no longer exist anymore.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think that there is an over reliance on technology um, that works great when everything is working great, but when everything is not working great, that technology is not reliable, right? And by that I mean cell phones specifically. Um, and if there's an emergency, we got to understand too. This is not a It's not a population center where this occurred. This is suburbs of major metropolitan areas. They don't have the same cell coverage as Austin or San Antonio, right? They just don't. It's just not it's just not as heavily populated. Plus, you have rolling hills, you have terrain mitigation things. So I'd say the cell phones themselves are not, they're probably maybe 67% reliable. Add on top of that, if there's an emergency happening, mass emergency happening, that cell phone net is going to get jammed up and clogged.
Right.
So, now you've gone from like 70% effectiveness communication solution to like 40 or 30 because you can't get through. So, when I always consider like, I did emergency management work in San Francisco. And the emergency management teams out there is AM radio and ham radios, old technology, but it's reliable, it's robust, and it works. And even if the cell phone towers go down, the power goes out, there's a fire, they know that this old technology is going to work. It's going to be robust. It's gonna happen. And I
It's
think that is,
one reason why I still have a POTS line.
yeah. Well, and this is the funny thing. I mean, in the '90s when we would go camping along the river in Central Texas, we would always have a radio with a battery backup, like one of those handheld radios that you could hand tune it, and you'd always have it playing. You'd always have it playing on the news channel or the emergency channel at night. And if you heard the alarm, everyone would just get in the car and we would drive away because we knew the flash flood was coming. We've kind of gone away from that because of the cell phones, and we have an assumption. To your point, we have an assumption that, well, it's going to work. It's great technology. It's been working. It'll keep working, right? And unfortunately, that's just not the case. That's just not the case at a lot of these times, and we've seen that time and time again through some of these disasters where the net's jammed or the towers are down and people are stranded, right?
I think the other one I want to think of is I think maybe it's also the way in certain populations now consume their information too as well. So
Yeah,
shifted a lot towards influencer driven content these days. So you're listening to more personalities
right.
or influencers for your information versus listening to the substance of the information. And most of these guys, let me just be honest, they're doing it for the views. They're doing it for the attention. They're not doing it to help you. They're doing it for the attention. And so consequently, you have and now introduced another layer, two, maybe three layers in that process for that information to trickle down to you. And so consequently, if you aren't looking at traditional news sources, authenticated news sources, whose sole job is, not to do it for attention, but to deliver you information, which is a very different thing than delivering for attention, then you are adding a subsequent delay. So I think, like in this case, I think you were implying it, but I think I will go down this rabbit hole. But the very fact that uh, July 4th happened, that there was a lot of lag time that was introduced by virtue of the fact that people people were just out having fun. People were having 4th of July, and these influencers aren't there for that. There's no secondary personality or tertiary personality who would step in for them in that role in their absence. They are there, to entertain you, not to inform you, which is a very, very different reality versus thinking about like, the major news outlets, they are going to have someone to fill in. So, I look at and I watch a lot of PBS is a good example, but PBS had not their normal crew fill it in. They had someone step in from their secondary, like their field team. Someone else anchored the show on Friday, but I still had somebody delivering the news to me on that, and from an authenticated source at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's when it comes to these type of events, um, and it doesn't matter if it's Central Texas, if it's Southern California, it's the Northeast. You have to have a team in place that understands what they're doing, understands what their roles are, and understands how to navigate some of these issues that are undoubtedly going to come up every time there's a disaster. Um, to your point, succession to command, redundancy when it comes to the news, right? There should also be that when it comes to the emergency management aspect of this. Um, the other thing I think we have to look at too is, some of these smaller communities, which Kerr, Texas, and Georgetown, Texas, are relatively smaller communities compared to their counterparts, Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio and Austin. They don't necessarily have the same capabilities as a bigger jurisdiction, right? Um, and so when we look at just time to action, right? You have less people. By virtue, you're probably less capable of responding, especially if you're overwhelmed. And when you have an influx of people on a holiday weekend, you now have a situation where there's more people in the jurisdiction than you're necessarily capable of supporting. And this is not a knock on any of their emergency services or first responders at all. This is just kind of a fact of what happens when you have a small town like Coachella is a great example of this. Coachella in California, tons of people come in for the concert and the festival, right? I
Yep.
mean, tons, and you have to bring in outside resources to augment the existing infrastructure and the existing people, in that first responder realm.
Yeah.
uh, I
It's it,
think
it's like overnight that that place in the middle of nowhere suddenly becomes a major.
it becomes a small city essentially.
Yeah.
And, it's and so you mean you have that dynamic coming in here as well, right? You have a ton of people who need help, and these smaller jurisdictions are overwhelmed as is. And then now you have rising floodwaters and you have excessive rain that's just coming. It's just nonstop, and the power company's trying to get the power on, right? And so, like you mentioned, and we've said this multiple times: series of cascading effects, series of small failures, which lead to bigger failures, right? Um, and I think it's important that we definitely go through and identify and hopefully this will come out what each of these failure points were and what led to what, and then how do we break that chain for the future, right?
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things that we have to remember is, and this is one of my biggest criticisms of um, the social media tarring and feathering aspect, and maybe some politicians, but they're just so quick to blame the National Weather Service or NOAA for doing their job. But let's take a step back. It's not just that one thing. There is a series of small little things like you could shout into the forest, say, hey, a flood's coming with a bunch of megaphones, but if no one's on the other end to hear it, then you did your
Yeah,
job, but you're still going to get tarred and feathered for that.
right.
I think people need
Well,
to understand.
again, and that's kind of this is unfortunately a political blame game that occurs when something like this happens, right? People exploit the tragedy for political and personal gain, but I think ultimately, um, the way our society works is everything is part of a bigger chain, right? Um, so there's a break in the chain. Well, it didn't break on its own, right? There was other factors there, and we know this from a lot of our work that a lot of local jurisdictions, a lot of state jurisdictions are reliant on federal money to operate. It's just part of how it is. Good, bad, or indifferent.
Exactly. Oh, am I?
That extra kind of boost of cash inflection to come in there and support what's going to happen. Um, when that goes away, it's anyone's guess as to what can happen, right?
Right.
Because we could, if we really wanted to be petty, we could play the blame game all the way back to probably 2000 or 1990s, right? Like why didn't they have better signage, right? I mean, so I don't think, when I see politicians and social media pundits doing that, I don't think it's really helpful because it doesn't change the fact that, like, yeah, you're right. We could have had better signage, but we didn't have it because for whatever reason that decision wasn't made. It doesn't change the fact that there was something else we could have probably done. We probably could have had a better mass notification system. We probably could have updated the critical infrastructure. We probably could have done a lot more, right? How far back do we want to go? Like, well, we didn't design the dams well enough back in the 50s when we were damming up the Guadalupe River. Like, if only we had added another flow chamber, it would have been better, right? I mean, so I find all that stuff to be very unhelpful at times, but when we actually go through and we analyze, look at the failure chain, say, okay, here was a key failure point. Here was a key failure point. Now, what do we need to do to mitigate that? How can we prevent that from happening in the future? I find that to be a little bit more effective than just trying to blame the National Weather Service in general, right?
I think the point we're trying to make here is not that to blame someone, but rather you have to look at everything and dissect every little aspect of something. If it's that easy to jump to that conclusions and everything like that, geez, we'd solve everything, including, how to, achieve world peace and solve world hunger at that point. But
Right.
it's not just one thing. It's a series of small little things all adding up. And, what you're trying to do is you're trying to break that chain from actually, rebuilding itself to a point where it would fail again. That's why you build in controls.
Right.
And people don't understand that it's not just, you can solve for a chain link, but, it is a series of small chains linking together. Even if you remove that chain, it may still happen. You just, you just maybe increase the percentages of not happening by a couple points, which, might make a difference in that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always equate it to, like, if you ever suffer a sports injury, it's like, well, I rolled my ankle playing basketball. Well, why'd you roll your ankle? Well, my shoe was too loose. Why didn't you stop and tie your shoe? Well, I was in the zone, man. I was gonna play that last round and then I was gonna tie my shoe, right? Well, why didn't you tie it better before, right? You just keep going and you realize, well, I could have just maybe called the timeout, tied my shoe, and then my ankle wouldn't be rolled right now, right? Um, but I think that's to your point, right? Small little detail things eventually fester into bigger things, right? And
Yeah.
then when they're chained together, as most of our emergency management, first response, and security infrastructure is, that one small thing that, we're going to get to it, in a minute, you didn't get to it. Now all of a sudden it snowballs, right?
Yeah. And I think people forget too, as well, is um, there's a human element, not because we want the human element, but sometimes we need the human element solely because the human element needs to discern what's going on. So this way we're not getting, to your point, the boy who cries wolf over and over and over and over again. Because if they keep crying wolf, sooner or later people are going to start tuning things out. And the end result is, when something is a real emergency, and no one's there to catch it, then then it's gonna even be worse at that point. Because, like, well, why didn't you say anything? And then it's a perpetual trying to undo that learned response, which is to ignore that authoritative source.
Right. Exactly. Well, we had a cyber event as well, so let's not lose sight of that as well.
Oh
So
gosh. So for those of you who aren't familiar, but one of the world's largest distributors for anything technology, Ingram Micro, it just had a cybersecurity incident. So right over I think it happened sort of Thursday, they got ransomed. So Bleeping Computer was reporting that they got hit with, was it? I forgot what ransomware it was. Strain. Oh God, I think it was Safe Play or Safe Pay ransomware. So they've been out for since what, Thursday, maybe Friday. Yeah, so so consequently, let's just be honest. One of the world's largest distributors for everything technology is out. So that means computers. Oh, and then not just that, they're just also like supply chains. So sometimes when I order a Dell monitor, sometimes it's actually drop shipped from one of their facilities, perchance too as well. So there's a whole bunch of logistics that they support too for people. So yeah, it's going to be a fun period of time. And I know I'm affected at work is because, we buy things from Ingram all the time for our clients all the time. And, it's as a former buyer, you learn to buy things and, some of the projectors that we use at Converge, we source through the Ingram network to procure too as well. So all I can say is, ow. That's gonna hurt a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, how, like,
You keep freezing, by the way. By the way, I'm not sure what it is.
oh, you do too, man. We're both freezing.
Really?
Um,
I'm wondering if
yeah,
it's my computer or if it's.
I think it's the internet connection, man. The interwebs are going crazy. No, I think what do you call it? But Ingram's a pretty massive operation, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's huge. It's they're like when I got into wholesale and distribution, what 20 years ago, 25 years ago, um, they were the supply chain that you would always procure anything from because they had everything. Everyone wanted to play with them, and over the years and times, I think it's Synnex and Tech Data merged together, so I think they're like a little bit bigger or the second biggest, whatever. But it's not anybody to laugh at. They are a huge and significant player in this space for technology and now even services. Like you could buy even cloud licenses for any number of products or solutions from them.
Right. So this is a big one. I mean, what's your who do you think did it? Like, do you think this is a state actor, non-state actor, hacktivist group? What's your take on it?
State actor.
State
I,
actor. Okay.
state actor.
And
Um,
go ahead. Sorry, man.
I'm. I want to say it's probably. I want to say it's probably like Eastern European. I want to say
Okay.
Eastern
Now,
Europe.
do you believe so? Kind of tying this back to some geopolitics. I mean, obviously, we, for the most part, Israel and the United States unilaterally bombed Iran, right? With minimal provocation, unless you want to include the proxies, um, which is a valid inclusion, But either way, um, do you see more of this happening? I guess is because of that event, and we're also, I believe, the 90-day period for negotiating tariff deals ends in 2 days, right? Um, do you see more of this happening as kind of a response to the geopolitics of the Iran situation and then the tariff deals? I think we've only made three tariff deals, and it was 90 countries in 90 days, is what uh, the administration was saying they were going to get done. I think we've only made three. Um,
So tariff related, probably not. Geopolitical, I would say probably yes. Um, if it's was it I would say more likely it is probably an extension of probably the old Lockbit group or one of the other major other ransom groups. They come around, dissolve, reform, dissolve, reform, dissolve, reform. But my guess right now, I'm thinking it's like Lockbit or one of the other major groups. that just reformed and then just want more money essentially. I suspect Eastern European, like Russia, right? Russia affiliated probably,
Right.
mainly because they have the most sanctions and they need cash and money and all that stuff. And this is like a great way to bring cash infusion and everything like that. That's my personal take of the situation. I think it's just one of those groups. Um, but you know one of the groups and everything like that. I was, people were, over the weekend, were panicking. I'm in one of these Facebook groups for resellers and service providers, and people were going, "Hey, should I be terminating my Google connection through Ingram and everything like that to, allow them to do that?" And I had to think and pause for a second. I kind of go, "Wait, time out." All of us have some sort of connection supply chain wise to any number of these distributors because that's how it was set up. Google and Microsoft sells licenses to a distributor who then resells licenses out to us. So, consequently, there is a good chance that, there's a link of some kind there. To an extent, I don't know. But, the question I had to pose back out is like, hey, does it really matter if it was Ingram? Like what happened if it was any number of any other vendors that are out there? Like what's going to happen and what's the impact. I think the question is goes back and it's beholden to the to the software manufacturer like the Googles and the Microsofts of the world saying, hey, if we're issuing your licenses and they're connected to our tenant, what's our impact, what's our risk, because we don't have any visibility as to what you're doing behind the scenes in your own application. Instead of buying direct, we're just buying through wholesalers. That's the fundamental difference.
Yeah, yeah, I guess that makes sense. And do you think any other companies will be targeted? I mean,
Uh,
every company's a target. Like, let me just lay that out there. Every company is a target. But do you see risk for any particular industry or any particular specific company in general?
the theme of the month is copycats. So in the airline industry, I think Hawaiian Airlines just recently had an incident too as well. A threat actor, they were able to recover pretty quickly. It looks like. But the other question that becomes of then I think was other airlines were getting subsequently hit concurrently. So my other question would be, who are Ingram's competitors and who I would be, very concerned if you're one of those because I think you're, sorry to say, uh, they now know how much information they got from Ingram. They're probably all chatting about this. All the reason why everyone who's a competitor of Ingram, directly should be on high alert at this point. They should be at DEFCON 1 going, hey, they got hacked, so we're probably next, if not already, kind of deal.
What was the dollar amount in loss?
Oh, I have no idea on this one.
If you were to estimate, what do you think? I mean, I would assume high millions,
Well, let's see. Let's take a quick look here on uh so Ingram Micro made in the 12 months ending from March 31st, 2025, they made $47.984 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And Q4 sales was $13.3 billion. So over what 3 months essentially is about what $4 billion, four to $5 billion.
Wow.
So if we factor in the fact that they're going to be out for let's say a month, okay, so that means they lost $4 billion potentially.
It's pretty brutal. Is that 10% of their earnings last year?
Probably, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a pretty substantial hit. Um, you know, so now let's kind of tie this in though. I mean, previous administrations, including uh President Trump's first run at president, they did increase, or at least I believe they did increase funding to Cyber Command and cyber assets to protect American businesses. I think that's been kind of a steady since President Obama's second term. I didn't get a chance to read the big beautiful bill because it's like a ton of pages. I don't know if you saw anything in there, but was any increase to cyber defense or cybersecurity?
Um, I don't think so because if I remember correctly, there's been a big push to remove a lot of the cybersecurity responsibilities and emergency response, take it away from the federal government and put it upon the states.
Mm. Oh yeah, I don't know if that's a good idea. I'm gonna be honest.
That's what's been proposed. I think that's what's one of the big. I think that was one of the emergency executive orders that was issued by the president. So,
Okay.
uh, so yeah, in the grand scheme of things, ooh, is all I can say.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things I think belong in the state's hands. Um, a national or a state specific cybersecurity posture, I don't think that's necessarily going to work out
Well,
for a lot of different reasons.
I kind of side with the pundits here. Is you have disparaging factors between different groups, and
Yeah,
then you
it's true.
also have uh, disparaging like even more redundant functions basically in government. So basically, rather than have a centralized view and then blend it with some of the state folks, now you have essentially more duplication of the exact same groups across 50 states. So that means you're technically
Double
already
cover. Yeah.
triple coverage. Like how many if you have one person doing the analysis and everything of an indicator of compromise and sharing it out to all 50 states, perfect. But now if you're not sharing information back and forth, that means 50 states have to do 50 indicators of compromise of the exact same thing.
Right.
So there's a whole set of duplication of efforts here that probably doesn't make sense. And by the way, can I also say that if you're duplicating stuff and you're not passing things on back and forth between various parties, then essentially who does it at what pace and everything is going to vary so much to the point where a state with more resources may get to it quicker versus a state with less resources may not got to it as quicker. So depending who you are budget wise, it's going to be challenging. And I think I don't know about you, but the idea of having to move to a very, very cold spot to do cyber in our country does not really sound appealing to me. Oh, but you can send me to Honolulu though. I will most definitely accept that one.
They're out on that Pacific trunk line, right?
Exactly. But yeah, if you send me to somewhere very, very, very cold, like, oh, I don't know, Juneau, I might think twice about that. But it kind of opens up the question at a point is like, do you really want to, can you attract the right talent, into those spots? And is there sufficient talent to, draw those spots? And I think we're already, fairly taxed in that space. Just like, you think about it, you really don't know what you're missing until you're missing it in like
Yeah.
the same idea. You don't really know what you're missing until you're actually losing it. And I think, people forget that the federal government is funding a lot of things like MSISAC and all the research and, the defense, stuff that you don't know about, but you take for granted. And it's, once you're gone and you're missing it, it just hurts you more than anything else. It's a classic cutting off one's nose to spite one's face.
Yep. No, definitely definitely get that. What else, man? Cyber Realm. There's been a lot. It's been 2 weeks. That's
Oh,
like it's like 10 years in cyber in the cyber realm.
I don't know. I mean, I just keep thinking about, Ingram. That was the big one that just,
Yeah.
that
That
shockwaves.
was that was big. I mean, that was and that's definitely gonna have some business impacts. Uh,
Yeah. I heard Qantas got extorted to a recent data theft incident too as well. Um, uh, gosh, think Nova Scotia Power may have had an incident where 3,000 people lost power. Or so 3,000 people, 30 to 300,000 people were impacted by a cyber attack in Nova Scotia Power. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's just so much that's going on in our space. At some point, I just hate to say it, but you just tune out noise. You just what are you gonna do? You just shrug and you just give up.
Yeah, I mean, there is a ton of stuff that's out there. Unfortunately, ton of threats. I mean, it's hard in an hour and some change podcast to go over all of it. But I think from my 2 cents, my perspective, take it for what it's worth. Um, what I see happening is, I mean, clearly the United States has exerted its military power once again. Um, I think a lot of this was twofold. One, it was to send a message to Iran, but I think the message was also being sent to the PRC and Russia, like don't play with us. So kind of two things here. One, I think they heard the message, and I think they're not going to play with us on the military side. But one message that we also sent, maybe inadvertently, was like, yeah, but our cyber, come hit us all you want, because we're really not that great at protecting our companies and our people when it comes to cyber. So my 2 cents is some of these recent events are going to lead to more resources from their end put into that realm, both state and non-state actors, and you know more cyber incidents occurring.
Yeah, I did remember. There was a fun story that just got
Good,
released.
bad, or indifferent. Hopefully, I'm wrong, but I don't think I am.
There's a fun story that also just came out this week. Johnson Controls.
No, I know where you're going with this, but go ahead. Sorry.
Oh well, they just started notifying people who was impacted from their September 2023 breach.
Hmm. Fun. Fun.
So 2 years later, in a sense, because it
Better
is
late than never, right? Better late than never.
well. Let us see.
Yeah.
All right. So I think it's been about an hour since we started the podcast. Final thoughts for the week, Al. What do you think?
Well, I think irrespective of where you are or what you're doing, I think I say this every podcast, is have a plan, be prepared. Um, don't take anything for granted. Disaster can strike at any minute, at any point, and it typically comes when you're least prepared. So the more prepared you are, the better off. If you live a life of preparedness, you're going to be good, and that's both physical and cyber.
Yeah. For me, I'm gonna end with our famous, challenging fate here. What could possibly go wrong? As long as you can answer that question, then you can always live in interesting times.
Yeah. Well, if you told me December 1st, 2024, what I would be experiencing up into July 2025, I would have told you you're out of your mind. You're high on some mushrooms or something like that. There's no way uh, that's any of that's going to happen. And yet here we are. And I'm still scratching my head a little bit about what is going on.
So I do have to point out something funny too, by the way. We've not yet talked about the Air India 787 crash yet. We've not talked about the Air India 787 the Boeing 787.
We haven't.
But I also want to.
We did say we were going to address it. So at some point we should.
But I do want to point out one elephant in this room, by the way, too. So, and that's this, is that both Boeing and Airbus has had a major crash of their one of their flagship aircrafts this year. When Japan lost an A350 because it landed right smack into a Japan Coast Guard plane, and then Boeing, we're going to figure out how that happened, but the crash upon takeoff, something happened there. So, needless to say, both major manufacturers losing a hull of their two major aircraft that, by the way, competes against each other, adjacently because they, bookend each other in the same year. That's kind of unusual, at least in my book. And these are the first hull loss, first loss, by the way, of any of those series aircrafts too.
Yeah, so kind of is being extremely generous. It's almost like they're in cahoots. I don't know, man. It just doesn't make any sense. But it is what it is. People will still fly. We'll still fly. It is, but it is getting harder and harder to want to get on an airplane. I can tell you that much.
Yeah. All right, folks, that wraps it this week. Also, as a reminder, well, I was going to say Al was going to be there, but he's not because he has to change his schedule. But we're going to be on the road in the next week, so we should be doing the podcast still. But we'll be also in Chicago next week too, as well. Al's going to be somewhere else, but we originally going to be going in Chicago. So we'll be at the Security Journal America's Leaders Conference in Chicago. So if you're there, come by and say hi to us. Well, not us. Say hi to me. I'll be there. I'll hopefully make it.
Call me. Josh will give you my number. You can call me. I'll say hi on FaceTime. Totally fine. And we got a bunch of buddies who'll be there with us too. A lot of our peers that we hang out with should be there as well. So if you get an opportunity to attend, highly recommend it. And then obviously you get to hang out with Josh, and some other cool people. I won't be there, unfortunately. Had to change of plans, but it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah. So we'll see you in the next episode of the podcast. And then until then, stay safe, everybody.